go to today?
No, probably I guess we move to the next session, but if
I don't have a session today.
I know.
Oh, you have a session?
No, I don't know.
Because I don't either, because like we could go discuss my part of this right now if you want to. Let's go to the room that two is going.
Yes, sir. Share what you have. Mine would be more than for you.
Does anyone still come to this working group? Does anyone still come to this working group?
Yeah, small but dedicated crew. Pretty small.
There's nothing here I should ever hear about.
No, there's nothing here.
And you don't even know.
I thought Sir went well.
Oh, I thought Stir went very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we got a lot done, right? There was a lot of
It was.
Garbage.
Back and forth.
but there was a
I
lot
thought
of
Stir was
progress.
actually pretty productive.
Yeah.
I thought so.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to actually engage on it. That was really the first time we engaged on the certain stuff and like the meat of what it's actually going to be. And, we needed that.
Richard and I just met, we kind of drafted stuff, so we're gonna send a slide to the
Okay.
list. As soon as I turn paper into.
No, that's good. Yeah, I mean, I would be happy to arrive at some simple subset that we're going to you just want to do like one T insert initially and then future plan.
We came up with 3 options that were possible, so maybe see what flies.
Okay. I mean, I think the OCSP actually has some potential in terms of, I think that pushes the work.
Yeah, exactly.
Pushes the work in the right place.
You should go sit on that side so we could just have one over. Like Roger, like walking back and forth.
I don't know if it means that.
Or go to tram and try to prevent the shit show that I cannot be in there for.
I mean, I'm scared of what's in trap. Maybe Dane. With Dane, I can get some good shouting done.
No, go fix that. Please
Wanna
go
to
fix
trap?
that.
Seriously?
I would go, but I have to be here. So, yeah, it's next door. Do you mind?
Oh, no.
Moving over to this side, thank you.
Any other else? So everyone should be set for 9:30.
Schedule the
We're leaving at 30?
So let's get started. Welcome to ECRIT.
So I think Ecker, so I'm going to be right here, but
Marshall,
right nearby.
Mark Linsner,
So, but I think Ecker was suggesting.
some things he couldn't control, travel will not be here, so just be me. We need to pass around these blue sheets. Pardon? Okay, you didn't sign everybody's name. Also, we need to have a note taker today. We have a few participants, so maybe there'll be a few notes. And it's only an hour long, so you can imagine it wouldn't be too many notes on 5-minute presentations. But that's something we do need. I can't do it up here at all.
See that?
Yeah.
You want some notes? Thank you.
Thank you.
How can I,
I think you're excused, though.
Maybe
Questions like that?
I'm sure you have any of me.
That was part of mine.
And what about Jabber Scribe? Is there a Jabber room open? And so we need to strive for that. Anybody have Jabber room open?
I can Jabber Scribe.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. All right. Start here with Randy, freestyle, you have to pass it left to right. Okay, notice the note well? Be familiar with it. And today's agenda. This agenda is slightly different than what was put up on the meeting materials until earlier today or yesterday. And so I'd like to take a few minutes just to show the changes and we've bashed that. We added validation locations around the plant chain. Brian's going to present that. And then also there's a new proposed working group, a SLIM, Selecting Human Language for Internet Media. Randy has agreed to just present on that. And lastly, the PETC Task Force 49 Bond is going to present that again. Any objections to the agenda here presented? A brief status on the working group documents. Got a couple that are active: car crash and heat call. Those will be presented. A couple expired. Need more help to resurrect those. The held routing has been working group request call submitted. That's over and done with. There was some discussion on the list after that. We have to figure out what we want to see there. And then the ISG processing of additional data 32. It's had quite a few comments, so even though it's an ISG, I've asked Randy to give a status on the changes, which are mostly just small editorial changes, but a lot of them, so I think we could hear about that. The milestones, we have some older ones that need updated. So the plan is to propose new milestones on the list and then go from there. Any comments about these slides? All right. Right. Remember. So viewers, let's look different. Okay. Where do you want? Take additional data? Sure.
So additional data has been through quite a few revisions in the past month. We had quite a lot of comments. I really do appreciate the comments. Alyssa did a very good review, and we had a lot of comments from Matt from the NINA group. So those were all much appreciated. We also did, you can go on, I think, another slide. We found a lot of bugs. I think everyone here knows what additional data, the purpose is. We can go forward in interest of time. So we verified the XML examples against the schemas. Hannes did quite a lot of work on that. We had quite a lot of bugs, minor things that were not right with the XML. So those have been fixed. A lot of the wording clarifications have been made. Alyssa, Keith, and Matt had a number of comments that are much appreciated. Those have all been addressed. And of course, even though we expect to go for IETF-wide last call, we always welcome additional reviews.
Comments?
Brian Rosen, I want to echo what Randy says about we appreciate all the comments. I also wanted to state that this is wired into the NINA stuff. We really need to have it, and we've been looking for it for a long time. But it's also true that there's this fairly large set of implementers that are going to go implement it pretty quick. So we need to get this thing out so that they can go and implement it. I think it's a pretty important thing. It's got a lot of interest, and it's got required information that we currently don't have any other way of getting. The other thing I wanted to say is that there's discussion going on within NINA about transport of things that would involve this. And it's not directly relevant to this group, but we're working on mechanisms that involve handling this thing outside of a SIP call. And I just wanted to make people aware of that.
Yeah, I appreciate the clarification. So, are there any objections with the work group has to initiate an IETF last fall?
Yeah, this is Alyssa Cooper. I'll just take a look at the very last diff because I haven't looked at the last diff since I think the most recent one. You put in some text on this last point that we had a thread on the mailing list. Yeah, or
right.
Did you? Yeah.
Yeah. So the last couple of minor things, there was some additional clarification about the fact that the privacy indicator could apply to multiple blocks. I didn't submit that revision only because today is the first day I could do it, and I forgot to do it today. Okay. But other than that, everything else is in there. So I'll do that probably after this meeting.
Okay. Great. Yeah, I think that sounds good. We can go to IETF last call. The only thing I would say is this draft, the spec shares a lot of really sensitive information with PSAPs, and so expect some IESG wondering about that, and having to do the usual like this is for emergency call and here's how we protect it and so forth. So you guys are used to that, but just I tried, like, that's a lot of my comments were sort of with that in mind because I know what happens when we take these to the IESG, but there will certainly be more of that with IESG evaluation. So.
I agree. And there is text in there that does actually, very explicitly say, don't use this outside of an emergency call because you're going to be sharing personal information and blah, blah, blah. So I think we're done with that.
Yeah, I think
you want me to go?
Crash.
Yeah. Actually, let's do e-call. It's kind of the natural progression because additional data is the foundation for e-call, and then e-call is the foundation for car crash. This is e-call. This is a draft that we talked about before, a few other IETFs. It specifies how to use the additional data mechanism and in order to carry information in the SIP signaling that's needed for next generation e-call. So next slide. Next slide. It's required by the 3GP. That's right. Okay. So yeah. So this version we had a lot of clarifications and bug fixes. Added a much better example. Fleshed out the schema, validated examples against the schema. So that's, I think, it.
Yeah, that's it.
And then car crash.
All right.
So car crash is the more generic version of next generation advanced automatic crash notification, NGAACN. And it builds on the e-call document. It's basically the call setup is exactly the same. The difference is that the e-call document uses the e-call specific data set, the MSD, whereas the car crash uses the more generic NINA APCO VEDS, vehicle emergency data set. Other than that, it's about the same. Technically, they're identical except for that. The additional editorial changes or differences between the draft is that the car crash talks more generically about the various forms of ACN that are deployed in the U.S., how they work legacy, and how they will work after migration to next gen. So I think that's it for car crash.
You want to talk about status a little bit, some of these bullets? Well, let me just say that IETF92 in Dallas, there was quite a bit of discussion about these two drafts. And Keith has mentioned here on the slide, and so I'm wondering, how has that gone?
So one of Keith's concerns prior to this was that the drafts, both of the drafts specified the same call setup mechanism independently, but it was identical but specified independently. He had a concern that this was potentially confusing and potentially could cause differences. And as a result of that, the car crash draft is now references the e-call draft so that it picks up everything from that to make sure that everything is going to be the same with the difference of the data sets. And then also, I think as a result of the discussion from the last IETF, we had a liaison that went out to 3GPP to make them aware of this draft.
We did. We sent that about 29, 30 days ago. To my knowledge, we haven't heard anything back. So,
Where was it sent exactly?
it was sent in the SA1, SA2, and CT1.
I mean, you will not hear back anything until they had a meeting to discuss.
SA2 said a meeting last week.
So obviously, in deciding what should become of these drafts, it's a little premature. I'd like to hear back from 3GPP based on liaison.
In particular, we asked them to let us know if they felt they had any concerns or there was any changes that were needed.
Okay, thanks. Brian, I think we're going to have you do the loss plan change.
This is very quick. I made this draft that's expired. I'll refresh it today. But I've generated a bunch of list traffic because somebody in NINA asked what had happened to it, and I told them that there was not enough interest in the IETF, and because there was no interest, it was dying, which was the truth. And they said, no, we can't let it die. And so I let other people know the same thing, and they all went and read the draft, yay, and sent a bunch of messages saying, I like it. What this does is it deals with an actual problem that happens fairly frequently, which is that a location which was valid becomes invalid. And that happens typically because something changed on the ground. The very easiest one to understand is a part of a county or area outside of a city gets annexed by a growing city. And now the addresses that used to be within the county change because they're no longer the same address. They are addresses assigned by the city. And that very typically requires that you update the address in the list that stores the data with new validation. The only way that we have currently to do that is there's a notion of periodic revalidation. So the list every once in a while will refresh the validation of each of the entries in the list. In practice, that causes the load on the validation source, the loss server that is used for validation, to balloon because you're revalidating millions of entries for tens of emergency calls. And the only reason you're doing this is because sometimes it changes, the validation changes. So what this does is it gives you a push mechanism. It says, when you validate, you can store you can ask the validation server, the loss server, to store a URI against the address. And if validation becomes invalid, it pushes a notice to that URI. It's not mandatory that the loss server support this. It can control how many of these things it has. It might only save one. The last one it's off. It has another mechanism which allows you to manage the fact that these changes happen at a predictable time, and it's typically in the future. So actually, you can be told that this will become invalid at midnight on such and such a date, and then you can say, well, look, if I made this change, that is, if I tried to validate an address as of this date after that event, would it be valid? And then the list server can look at the data that it has about the change that's coming up and tell you whether at that time it will become valid. And then when that thing changes, you can change your entry and everything will be great. Once again, we have people implementing loss servers. There are quite a few implementations of loss servers, and there are deployments happening. We have several deployments, statewide deployments in the U.S. of emergency calling systems that are using these new mechanisms, so that they're using lost to route calls within the state of Maine right now. This problem is real. They're actually finding it. And this mechanism has been looked at by a bunch of these implementers that says, yes, that will avoid an enormous load on the loss servers and give me a positive indication of change instead of I stumbled across it because I'm doing periodic revalidation. Simple mechanism, very short. It's like 5 pages is the whole draft. And I'd like to move this along. Questions?
Just a comment. I guess it's a little unfair to ask how many folks have read this, since I think it expired in 2013. But once you repost it, it'd be good to have several reviewers to see if there are any objections. I think we could go like that. Any other comments about this? All right. Well, thanks, Brian. All right. I think, Randy, we're going to talk about SLIM.
So this work has been kicking around for a little while, few years actually. We have a proposal now. The basic. We have a proposal now for a working group called SLIM, which would address the need to establish the human language for communication in 2 problem sets within SLIM. And that would be non-real-time, specifically email, and real-time, specifically SDP within SIP. So what I'm going to talk about here is only the real-time case. So the core problem is that when you're setting up a call, we need to match the caller's need for specific languages and specific media, which are tied together, to the capabilities of the called party. And language includes spoken, written, signed, which matches with the media that we can support, meaning audio, text, and video. And that, the general purpose of this is anytime an individual is calling into a call center, it's not particularly helpful for somebody calling up a friend where you've already got context. But when you're calling a call center, that's really helpful. And so the canonical example is you have a call center, and the call center is capable of supporting various languages, including a sign language, using some combination of in-house staff and external translators and interpreters. And emergency calling is a very key case, of this generic example. So let's see, right? So the proposal here is that the human language gets to be, you negotiate that along with the media because they really are tied. For example, if you're negotiating a sign language, you need to have a video for that. And that you also may want to negotiate media for which there is no language, that's just for background sound or, just to see the person's face. So in some cases, the call center will have staff on hand that can support both the media and the language. And in other cases, that may require that there be a bridge to an external service, translation or interpretation or a relay service. And what you want to end up with is the most preferred language and media of the caller that is capable of being supported by the call center. And conceptually, this is really very much the same as the way you set up any other media stream and the way you handle the codecs, for example, and the media types. And it's important that both ends be aware of what you ended up negotiating. So we're proposing to use SDP. It's worth noting that all entities in the call path that can see the SIP messages can see the SDP within the invite. And you can route the call to a facility that supports the language and media, or you can bridge in external resources. Next slide. So this is the generic case, the general call center case. So you've got the UE that's placing call via proxy. The user's proxy goes to the call center's proxy, and the call center's network can have a policy-based routing function that can take a look at what is being set up or what is being requested and then route to a specific call center. So if you're calling an airline, for example, and you want to speak Spanish, but you're calling from the United States, the airline could route to a specific call center, possibly one in Spain or Mexico, or possibly one that just happens to have Spanish staff handy and available. And then within the call center can route to a specific agent that's capable of handling your needs. Next slide. So the emergency calling case looks very much the same as the generic case, except here we're going specifically to an ESI net using an ECRF, and we know that the emergency calling case has a policy-based routing function that's capable of taking this into account. Okay.
I forgot to tell you to fix ECRF because they don't know that.
I'm sorry?
The audience doesn't know ECRF. It's still lost.
Right.
I'm sorry, a proxy connected to one.
Yeah, we had proxy on your previous slide, you should probably ESRP.
Right.
ECRF.
Yeah. You're right.
Yeah. But it's the same.
Right.
It's all right.
So the proposal is that there's a new attribute, an SDP stream attribute that uses RFC 5646 language tags. Multiple language tags can be specified, and that they're listed in preference order. In the proposal, you could specify different send and receive values, but they would normally be the same. And there's a caution against trying to negotiate a language for a media that doesn't make sense. Next slide. So, sorry? Okay, well, I just thought I'd just go over here just in case it answers any questions. So this work has been going on for actually quite a number of years, and as part of that, we have repeatedly gone back and forth about trying to do this in SDP versus trying to do this in SIP, and we have spent exhaustive amounts of time and effort working out exactly how to do it in SDP and exactly how to do it in SIP using different mechanisms. The conclusion is that either way approach can work. There's no approach that's perfect. Neither approach will not work. However, doing it in SDP has some advantages because you avoid a state where you are negotiating the media twice, once in SIP and then again in SDP, which could cause you to negotiate mismatches. Now, I guess we'll take questions.
To stay in the pink box, I guess you just perform cue blocking.
Okay. Krista Holm, I think my question is actually related to this because at the previous meeting I have asked why we don't use the existing media feature tags, etc. in SIP. You say there has been an evolution and a conclusion. I'm not aware of that evolution and conclusion, but maybe I missed it. But so I guess I still have this. I don't really understand the media negotiated in SIP. Sorry, the language and media negotiated in SIP don't match the media SDP negotiated. I mean, you don't negotiate any media in SIP. You negotiate the media in SDP.
Exactly.
So I don't understand what.
Right. You do negotiate media in.
Well, you have media feature tags which you can carry in SIP, but my understanding of those those actually indicate the languages which are associated with the media, because I mean you're not the zip headers are always in one language, right? So
we really have. I mean, I know you won't like hearing what I'm saying because you've heard it too many times, but I don't appreciate declaring consensus when there isn't one, and particularly because it happens to be consensus that fits your preferences. Secondly, I think we really have two separate problems. Namely, we have a negotiation problem, which is generally between two known endpoints in SIP, and we have a call routing problem, which is when you're trying to choose among a potentially large set of suitable endpoints that may or may not share administrative or detailed state knowledge. So in my mind, this is not necessarily an either-or proposition, but to figure out which one is the right one. And the two that you mentioned are, the two cases are the emergency calling case versus the single call center case, actually somewhat different. Namely, in the emergency calling case, you actually may have a dedicated ASL speaking center that covers a large part of the state because you can't afford to have an ASL interpreter in 50 different PSAPs because they don't get enough call volume. So that's a separate logical entity that has no state sharing with any of the other 49 PSAPs. In a call center, assuming it's a small single site type of call center without call routing, between those, you have a single SBC, PBX, IVR, whatever you want to call it, combination that essentially does queue management and resource assignment. And it is the media endpoint because it does recording, it does all that. In the latter case, it really doesn't much matter, like you said, which way you do it, because the entity rightfully looks at both of those elements. It looks at SIP headers and it looks at SDP. In the former one, mucking around with SDP for call routing is not the SIP design, is not the SIP architecture, never has been the SIP architecture, and it generally means that you can't do encryption, other things break. So it's just posing it as an either-or proposition, I think, is not exploring the design space. What we should look at is, and I don't think the contradiction argument matters, because simply once you routed it to the ASL-only call center based on SDP and it turns out something doesn't work there, you've got a bigger problem. Because getting it back is going to be difficult either way. So I'd see that as fine-grained versus coarse-grained routing versus negotiation, however you want to phrase that. Namely, that you take a model where you do from all of the practical places that I've heard, it is you have a coarse-grained problem and you have a set of ASL speakers that you want to preferentially, if you can get there, if such a ASL center exists in your coverage area, you want to go there. If it doesn't exist, obviously you want to send it to the real center, which does relaying and whatever else. The voice center in that. And so I don't see that there is a contradiction problem there that is anything but an implementation bug in that case. And that many of the simple cases that we would want can indeed be done and should be done as a call routing function, just like any other call routing function. And we should look at that model as opposed to treating it as an either-or proposition.
Bernardo Bomais, I'd like to second a lot of what Henning just said, but also I'd like to make a distinction between the emergency case and the non-emergency case, and they can be very fundamentally different. For example, if somebody who is speech impaired is calling, the barber shop or whatever, that call has got to be routed through the interpreter. It won't go direct to the barber shop, or the barber shop then, asking an interpreter bridged in, right? So the call flow is fundamentally different. But the other aspect, which also kind of echoes what Henning said, is that I understand some of this SDP stuff, and some of these disability call flows are complex because they involve multiple media. For example, you could want, I want RTT, and, it depends. The person could be speech impaired, they could be hearing impaired, some combination of the above. When I use RTT, I speak English. When I use ASL, I speak American Sign Language. So I understand the desire to have a language associated with each M line, and that does make some sense to me. But then there is the call routing aspect, which is distinct. And as Henning said, there can be many different deployments, and trying to send this direct to a PSAP who may or may not have interpreters, any video capability at all, right? You want that call to succeed in some degree. In fact, I think it's legally mandated that it succeed. Right? You certainly don't want it to be worse than it is today, which is not great. And so there's basically, what I'm trying to say is this is a complicated problem. Getting a full problem statement with all the aspects and examining it actually is extremely worthwhile. Having that reviewed by the disability community and understanding the impacts of the call flows would also be very valuable. So there's, I'm not saying the language tag is wrong, but I'm saying there's a lot of thinking that has to be done here before you just drop a solution on somebody. And my personal opinion is that should be done in a group that has the expertise like this one to actually fully investigate both the emergency and the non-emergency aspects of this, not done in some group with email that also is doing email at the same time, which is kind of the current proposal, which doesn't make any sense to me.
Brian Rosen, respectfully disagree. I don't think there's any difference whatsoever between the emergency case and any other case. For every single example you gave of emergency being different, there's an exact analog today in the same environment everywhere else. No one wants to be able to go through two-step dialing, dial an interpreter and then go somewhere else. That's what they have to do. They don't want to do that. They want to label their calls the right way and have the system set it up the right way. But they can't do that now because there is no way to label what their calls are. So we really do want to have all of the variations that you discussed, where you've got all the complicated routing mechanisms happen, where you need to know every single one of the pieces of information that this thing tells you, what media there is, what the relationship is between the language and the media, and all that stuff is part of the routing decision. And you can't make it any simpler. You need to know everything that we're talking about putting in this thing in order to make the routing decision. Yes, you could replicate exactly the same syntax of the relationship between the media and the language in the signaling as you do in the media, but why do you do that? We can route based on the media. We have been, that door has already been opened. People are already routing on media now.
The same mistake twice does not count as engineering progress.
All right. I have a specific suggestion. What we should do, I think, is to charter the particular work, and remember that we're really talking about a chartering decision right now, that just deals with labeling the media and does not deal with routing. And then we can do a different group, a different effort that deals with routing. Because labeling the media, everybody agrees, is a good thing to do. No one's arguing against it. They're saying doing the routing based on that is not a good idea. Okay. Getting the media labeled is useful, independent of how any routing decisions are made. And that's the way I think we ought to go forward.
Just test that. Does anybody object to Brian's
Bernardo Marxa, I do agree with Brian on that much, that little piece. I disagree with everything else you said. But I do agree with that piece, but my concern is the draft as it is tries to do the whole picture, right? And if it were narrow, that would be fine, but then the next question would be, great, how do I use this stuff, right? And that is, let me put it this way. I think there's a very big need to solve the bigger problem, and I'm not against chartering the narrow thing you've said, because I think you'd make more progress that way, but I would also like to see the bigger issue, because I think it's needed now. I mean, I hate to say this, but I think like right now we need an answer to the bigger problem. I think.
Brian Rosen, I think to the contrary, right now we know exactly how we route calls for emergencies. We route them exactly the same way as any other call. And that means that a relay call, in particular, goes to the relay vendor first and then goes to 911. That's how we really do it now. Okay? And that is what we would do with or without this draft. And that is what we would do for the next while. There's a desire to change that by some folks. In order to change it, we would have to have mechanisms that we do not currently have. That would be something that we would discuss here. But But if we could still use this draft within the PSAP, not making a rounding decision, just within the PSAP. This is Spanish speaking, put it on the Spanish queue. This is not, arrange an interpreter. That's not the same as ALS. That would not handle relay, but it would handle the practical problem that PSAPs have right now of being able to handle English and Spanish within one PSAP. Right now, they got to ask.
Henning speaking, the general advantage is that because you don't have fine-grained state knowledge on when you're doing the coarser-grained routing, by definition, you don't want to have a ESRP mech around or how many Spanish-speaking agents you have available at that very moment, because that changes second by second. So you want to go to at least probabilistically high probability right. Could be that your single ASL interpreter just is taking a leak, so you're unlucky and you can't deal with that. So, but what I am worried about is that it helps to have a big picture right as to who's supposed to be doing what. Namely, who's supposed to be making, and since the primary one, the model it uses, which we are both very familiar with, direct calling and all of that, for direct ASL calling, which currently we do by kind of labeling things in an ITRS database type of thing, where you have a direct call to a PSAP that can do it, but that doesn't really work for an emergency case that well, because you still have both cases. But practically speaking, from what I can tell, if we look at the kind of capabilities that you have, namely that in all cases, this is going to be a preference indicator of the caller. And namely, we need to have a backup mechanism because in all cases, the call must go through even if it's suboptimal. So it is a preference indicator, not a failure indicator, unlike in a media case where if you speak H261 and I only speak H264, sorry, we ain't going to have video today. And same for media types and all of that. Unlike in the media negotiation, this is a preference where we have a default behavior, namely default behavior relayed, translated, language line, whatever the equivalent is in each case, where the call goes through suboptimally, but if I know more, I want to do a better service to whoever is calling. That is fundamentally different than media negotiation. Media negotiation is establish a compatible subset of media. This decision is, if possible, optimize the call behavior. If it's not possible, do what works in all cases, even if it's lousy and nobody likes it and it kind of sucks and all of that. But the call goes through. You never want to refuse a call because you can't find a Spanish speaker. You make do. That's the difference. And that, I think, is because it's a call routing decision, it is not easily mapped into a meeting, into the SDP model.
Please.
Paul Kizavet from the Jabber Room says this could eliminate press 1 for Spanish in the world, and that would make many people happy. I don't want to
Yes, Banat Bakri. If we do the routing for the ASL, similar to the routing of the language, Spanish, what you have given the example to, it will be easier because the PSAP can make the decision to engage a relay service. And that's a much easier way to solve it than fiddling around finding a relay service somewhere. Thanks.
Brian Rosen. I can only speak definitively for the U.S., and today we can't do that. It's not a practical thing to do. Tomorrow we might be able to do it, and whether it's desirable or not is arguable. But if we wanted to do it, it would take a lot of changes, including regulatory changes, and we're not prepared to do that now. And we need the press 1 for Spanish is really useful, and it's very useful for the emergency case. I think that it is a negotiation, and in the same sense that you accept whatever you get even if it's wrong, if the thing says, I speak Turkish, you will accept it as Turkish. And even if the guy who answered it really doesn't know much Turkish, the practical way we deal with this is we engage a translator. And every PSEP I know has a way to engage a translator to handle Turkish. So they will accept the call with Turkish as the thing, and they will arrange a translation service. They have a language line. That's what they do with it. So I think that it isn't as different as you implied. You negotiate and you end up with a compatible change. It's how does the PSEP do that? And that's all inside the PSEP. It has no effect on routing outside. Routing outside is absolutely definitive, and the negotiation that's done inside the PSEP is absolutely definitive. I accept this call as Turkish. I will respond as best I can, is really the statement, in Turkish. Because as a practical matter, in every case that I know of, the person who answers the call actually only speaks English, and he has to struggle for a while until he gets language line on the call, which takes minutes because they have paperwork to fill out. It's really awful. But it's the way it happens, right? And they try as best they can to go, but they accept the call as it is. And if it says Turkish, they answer it in the best they can in Turkish. So I really think it is the same. And I think that labeling is really, really helpful. And routing is something that is different and might be a lot harder to deal with.
I also just wanted to respond to some of the comments that Henning and Christer said at the very beginning about how this is sprung, there's consensus matches certain people's preferences, surprise, blah, 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 because could not be further from the truth. This work's been going on for many years. Nobody really cared where it was done, how it was done, SIP versus SDP. People came in, said, do it this way. We rewrote the draft entirely to do it that way. People said, do it that way. The draft was very, very, very fair because, honestly, nobody's religious about this at all. And certainly nobody was surprised. Henning was at the face-to-face meetings in Berlin, and I don't even remember all the places we were at. I think Christer may have been in Orlando or Berlin as well. We have had everybody involved in the email. Everybody's been invited to all the face-to-faces. There is nothing that has been happening in secret or as a surprise. Nobody has an agenda about trying to force SDP on the world, okay? We don't care.
Brian Rosen, and more than anything, many of that, it's been going on for 2 years and there's only one draft. If you don't like it, write another draft.
Bernard about Microsoft. Let's be clear about what's been going on and not going on. Okay, I agree that we've been discussing aspects of this, and I think the draft has improved to be able to address more use cases. What really has not happened, and I think is part of what we're talking about, is discussion of the context of using this, right? And I believe it would be very helpful to have, to separate the work just the work that's here, which I think is useful, from that larger context, which may expose the need for additional stuff. And I think that's the issue that really hasn't been under discussion at all, certainly not in here, not from the emergency perspective of handling all of these, disability use cases.
Brian Rosen, send text.
Chris, I didn't want to throw away SDP versus something else. I just like to I have asked before, at least at previous meeting, I don't know before that, why we can't use existing mechanisms. And I think maybe it's if the draft explains that, then I apologize, I missed it. But I think we should have. Why can't we use existing mechanisms? Why don't they work? And then we can, define something new. So that's all I'm asking for.
Yeah, thank you, Randy, for presenting that informational status. All right.
Alyssa. So we're going to talk about this again in dispatch. This has agenda time in dispatch, which is good. I think actually I'm glad that we had it here because because the focus of this group, and I think in dispatch we'll have the even broader conversation of the email parts. But if people do feel, I felt a little bit like it sounds like people like let's maybe focus on the labeling piece first, and we've been trying to charter small, fast working groups and then recharter if necessary. So that is kind of sounding like a good direction, at least from my perspective. And if people feel like that's true and you want to get up at the mic and dispatch and say that in front of the rest of the email world, that might be useful. So
I just want to also point out that not only will it be discussed in dispatch on Wednesday morning, but tomorrow, Tuesday, there's a working lunch to discuss this. So if you want to go and are not familiar with it, let me know. Email has been repeatedly sent. People, I'm sure, think I'm spamming them to the ECRIT, the SLIM, and individuals.
Right, thanks. Mom, we're going to have your presentation next. In fact, we want you to, can you stand in that pink box?
I don't see them.
Oh, yeah.
The door opens.
Suddenly you start getting like kind of flickery and it gets teleported to all right, beamed up.
So, hello everybody, my name is Ban Al-Bakri. I'm going to present STF 489. It's Total Conversation for Emergency Communication. So what are we going to talk about today is the why the STF and what is total conversation, what's the benefit of it for emergency communication, the goals of the STF, the current status of standardization, and then the potential issues impacting IETF. Thank you. Next slide, please. So STF 489, it's an ETSI special task force which reports to the MTEL group. The team member, we are 3 people. You may recognize some of the people here. We have a web page if you are interested to know details about our work. And the work is co-financed by the EU, European Commission. Our timeline, we started March 1st this year, and we will end the work in March, end of March next year. And for that, I have a sheet at the back on the desk there, and please, could you sign that sheet for me? It will show that you have been present in this presentation. Thank you. So why the STF? It's kind of attendee list for us. We need it for the EU Commission. Just make it clear. So why the STF? We have EU policy and then the domain 3 of ICT standardization work program 2010-13, which requires total conversation to support communication between citizen and emergency services. So you can see in the directive mentioned here that it should ensure access for disabled end users for emergency service is equivalent to that enjoyed by other end users. I'm not going to read that, but just shows what it says. Next slide, please. Also, you can see in the domain 3 of ICT standardization work program, it mentions total conversation, that it is required for emergency, I think also, or accessibility and of interoperability of related solutions for total conversation. And the draft rolling plan of ICT standardization, it also talks about solutions to fulfill the requirements and can be deployed across Europe. Thank you. Next slide. So what's the total conversation for emergency communication? Actually, total conversation is a definition of ITU. What it means a multimedia with three medias: video, real-time, text, and audio. It's used for every person. You can use that, but it's also very useful for disabled people, for example, deaf, hard of hearing, blind, speech disabled, who require real-time text for texting or video for sign language. Also, this is the total conversation. So what we are talking about here, total conversation for emergency communication, when the user calls PSAP for emergency cases, and this is our task. You can see here also in the photo, like you have the person who's talking and then the other person, so they do sign language, they can see each other. Next slide, please. So if the user calls the PSAP, for example, and he cannot get the requirement, like sign language, for example, then they will need a relay service, which is also called assisting service. And this is to help the user to use his preferred language and modality. The relay service could be invoked by the user, the application service provider, or the PSAP during the initiation of the call, or the PSAP can invoke the relay service when the call is already established. The best case that all parties receive all media from each other. So what is the benefit of total conversation for emergency communication? If we take the video, it makes the total conversation user more confident because he can see the call taker. I mean, this is not about a deaf person, it's a normal person even. And the PSAP operator can also assess the situation of the caller and take proper action. In addition, as we know, it's very important for sign language, from the total conversation user and the PSAP or relay service. The real-time text can be used for example, accurately and rapidly passing information, name, address, medication, rather than pronouncing them, which could be very long and could have make errors while hearing. The whole conversation or in one direction, it could be useful. Example, one you receive voice and the other you text, depends on the user's capability. And for initial communication, for example, if the user is sign language and he needs a relay, by the time the relay is invoked, he can communicate some information via text. And this is why the real-time text can be useful. The audio is also good for the call taker to assess the background information. For example, even if he's deaf, but there is like a lot of noise behind, the call taker can receive this information and take action based on that. It could be useful for one-way communication between the total conversation user and the PSAP, or it could be a supplement for other medias. So now we'll talk about the goals of the SCF. What we need to provide. We're going to provide a technical report, and that shows some describing some implementation guidelines. We need to assist ETSI as MTEL to coordinate with other standard bodies and relevant stakeholders so that the recommendation in these existing specifications, this is a TS and this is a TR, can be implemented. And they exist, you can download them from the ETSI web if you like. They're available for free. Assess if total conversation requirements are fulfilled by other necessary standards bodies. For example, there are no gaps or contradiction. And in particular, we are looking at IETF and 3GPP standard support for total conversation. So this is why one reason why we are here today. Yeah, and we have to see what changes are required. And also what we need to do is to coordinate and raise awareness that we are undertaking this work in ETSI. So we are the relevant groups, in the 3GPP are SA1, SA2, CT. We already attended SA2. We're going to do SA1 and CT groups the next months. IETF, ECRIT, and SLIM looks very useful here. GSM Association for Network Operators Acceptance of Total Conversation. We also have found some issues which we communicated with them. Human factor, and then ENA, for example, the European Emergency Number Association, and others. So the goal to coordinate with them. What's the current status of the standardization? At the moment, we have the technical report, the technical specification of MTEL 3GPP, IMS is the multimedia for fixed and wireless. And we have multimedia telephony covers the requirement of total conversation. And the IMS emergency session specifies the support of total conversation in emergency call. For IETF, we have found that total conversation is referenced in RFC 6443 and 6881. And in ICRIT, we found that in additional data related to an emergency service, we have this, what has just been presented. Just what we need to do in this additional data, we need to make sure that if we use that there is a way to indicate the assisting service with the requirement that it needs. And if that draft is agreed, then we can use it as a reference. And again, the SLIM, what we have just discussed, could be a good reference for our work. And the ETSI human factor, there are the specification, you can find the number here. Also, you can download it for free, as I said, all ETSI specs. It specifies requirements for harmonized relay services. We have also looked at the ENA 112 LTD specification, where they have scenarios on how the IP-based emergent services should be deployed. I mean, it's only scenarios. Next slide. So what are the issues that could impact IETF? First of all, is the inclusion of assisting service. Is it the same as per non-emergency session? And this should be also working for roaming and non-roaming scenarios. If you're in your country and you have your assisting service and your PSAP in the same country, that's easy. But once you roam, that makes a difficulty. Apparently, in Europe, the sign language is not common. Every country has its own sign language. So if you are in Germany, you go to France, and you need assisting service, the French assisting service cannot help you, the sign language.
Because we're Alex time, like you just said.
Sorry. Yeah, but, yeah, okay. But do we have time, I think? No? Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry, I'll go that a bit faster. We have some jurisdictions may not allow PSAP to contact assisting service in different countries. And then even if you have the roaming case, how to dispatch emergency service if you have assisting service or PSAP in different country. And then we have language problems, contact info authority, or whether they're authorized to contact or not. Again, for the assisting service, how to indicate and identify the assisting service. Is it explicit, implicit indication in the profile, or impacting indication in the language modality tags? Implicit is. And then again, it's related to the assisting service, how to include the assisting service. Is it a conference invoked by the PSAP PC user or application service provider, or is it, needs to ensure location and caller identity information are provided transparently to PSAP? This is one of the requirements, we need to have this ensure that these are transparently sent to PSAP. Also, the assisting service need to be available 24/7 and trusted by the PSAP, because actually the others are not required to be available 24/7. Routing to the most appropriate PSAP, how to do that, should consider location, media, modality, language. What we prefer, all three media are provided in every total conversation emergency service. And we think about, what about having automatic speech-to-text translation application? Maybe not for sign language, but for normal language. And this is our contact. Thank you.
Brian Rosen. First of all, I would suggest that you look at the NINA document, because it deals with many of these issues in ways I think you'll find useful. The second thing is that additional data was specifically designed to make sure that any entity along the path added information about what it was contributing to the path, who it is, how to contact it, what it knows about the subscriber, etc. So that was, and it was explicitly designed for entities like Relay or a telematics service provider or somebody else who's in the path already, and they get to mark who they are so the PSAP knows who's on the call and how to get them. But the NINA document in particular addresses some of your issues about conferencing and how to invoke these things and how all three media work simultaneously.
When you say the NINA document, you're referring to the I30803?
Yeah, the I30803 is the current public one, and I can get you a revision. There's a revision coming out, and I can get you a version of that.
And I just also remind folks that there's a form back there that I had asked him to leave it back there instead of passing around. So if you'd like to, put your name on that. Participation in this presentation.
A question from Paul Kizavat in the Jabber room. He said, which is more important, trust by the PSAP or trust by the calling user?
Yeah. I mean, it could be regulation requirements, not the PSAP trust. I mean, we got this comment in the meeting in MTEL. Someone said that it's not... So I don't have a reference to this regulation or really if it exists, but someone has commented that.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. That concludes our ECRIT meeting. Have a great IETF week here.
Thank you.
Okay.